What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about guitar setup. Specifically, we're going to talk about 5 guitar setup myths, misapplications of guitar setup. We're going to talk about that kind of stuff. I actually want to replace the strings on this custom shop Gibson, and so we are going to kind of do things and talk about them as we do them. So 5 things that you probably have heard on the internet that aren't necessarily true. Okay, so 5 myths about guitar setup. Before we get started, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and the like button if you like guitar stuff. And also you can check out the little Patreon thing, as well as, since we don't have sponsors for these videos, DylanTalksTone. We make pickups. That's what we really do. That's what my real job is. So check that stuff out. All right, let's get into it. All right, guitar setup number 1, myth number 1. And people hate it when I do this, so this is gonna be fun. That doesn't hurt anything. Not at all. It sounds violent, but it doesn't hurt anything. A lot of people would say, well, I guess you don't want to scratch the top of your guitar if the bridge comes off. So there is that. So maybe that was a little violent. But you can cut the strings off your guitar. No big deal. Doesn't hurt anything. People are going to say, well, that puts too much tension, stress on the neck. It does blah, blah, blah. It's a freaking tree, okay? If it can sway in the woods for 100 years, when it's windy, through hurricanes, all that kind of stuff, then it can move 0.005 of an inch with about 100 pounds of pressure on it. It doesn't hurt anything. It's a tree. The other thing is, related to this, is that people want to say that you should change your strings one at a time. Now, there are a couple guitars where that is helpful, but not totally necessary. When you think of something like a Floyd Rose, you definitely, it's easier to change, or anything with a tremolo, really, a floating tremolo, it's easier to change them one at a time because you can kind of maintain tension on the guitar, and it just makes it easier to manage the parts. So that is number 1. The other reason for that is, let me throw these strings away. How else are you going to treat your fretboard? Got some lizard spit fretboard oil here. Oh, you know, I didn't think of this as a setup myth, but it kind of is. This is not hydrating the fretboard. So this is a little bonus tip. I didn't even put this in here. This is cleaning. So when you oil your fretboard, it's actually a solvent. So lemon oil or orange oil, depending on what you use. I think that's orange oil is the lizard spit stuff. This is not moisturizing anything. Oil doesn't moisturize. Humidity is what controls the moisture in your guitar. This is literally just a solvent that cleans your finger goo off of the fretboard. And I like to do this, not every time I change strings, but I don't know that it's been quite a while since I've done this particular guitar. So I just wanted to make sure we do it this time. But myth number 1, don't cut the strings off your guitar, or don't take all the strings off your guitar at the same time. I mean, how else would you do this? You need to do it. And it doesn't hurt anything. If you leave the guitar for a long period of time with no strings on it, what will happen is the guitar will go to a completely relaxed position, which it is in right now, but it might move around a little bit. And so when you go to put strings on it the next time, you'll definitely have to address your truss rod if that's the case. But other than that, it doesn't really hurt anything, especially the 15 or 20 minutes that it's going to take you to put new strings on it. All right, let's talk myth number 2, and that is going to be the truss rod is not the action adjustment on the guitar, okay? So when we adjust the truss rod on the guitar, what we're actually doing is we're creating a playing surface. What do we mean by playing surface? Well, all the other measurements, so the string height down here at the bridge, the nut height here, the pickup height afterwards, and then of course the intonation, because the intonation is the overall length of the strings, are all determined by the playing surface. So if your playing surface is curved this way, that changes all those other measurements, right? If you curve it this way and have it kind of humped backbone like that, that also changes all of those measurements, and a couple thousandths of an inch makes a difference, right? So, you know, 5 thousandths of an inch, 10 thousandths of an inch, etc., that makes a difference. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we establish the playing surface before we make any of our other measurements. Now, that's not to say that that measurement doesn't affect the other measurements, because it does, but it's the baseline. So if you adjust your truss rod, yes, it's going to affect your string height, quote unquote, your action, but you don't want to do it that way, or you don't want to rely on your neck relief truss rod to adjust your string height, because it doesn't just adjust your string height, it adjusts everything on the guitar. So this measurement, this neck relief, adjusting your truss rod, really is just the basis for the rest of the setup. Typically it's between totally flat and sometimes around 5 or 10 thousandths up to 15 thousandths. We're going to get into that a little bit later in our conversation. But yeah, truss rod adjustment is not string height. It's not action. So if your action is too high on your guitar, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with your truss rod. All right, got all the strings back on here. Myth number 4 is that lower action is better. There's a lot of different guitars. There's a lot of different ways to play guitar, like how you approach the instrument, like how hard you play, the string gauge that you play, the style of music that you play. There's a lot of variables in every instrument, right? And not only every instrument as far as how we approach the instrument, but also technical things. So for example, this guitar has a 12-inch fretboard radius, which is pretty flat. This guitar has a 7¼ inch radius, which is not very flat, which means the fretboard has a lot of curve going this way. This also has a tremolo. Sometimes you want room for the strings to go down because you want to warble the tremolo, so you need a little bit higher action to give it some room. Sometimes because of the way the rest of the guitar is set up, you want a little bit higher action. This guitar, on the other hand, has a 10-inch fretboard radius, really good fretwork, and the action is very, very low, like 60 thousandths or 55 thousandths on the high E, something like that. Very, very low. That's opposite of something like this Les Paul Special that has, Les Paul Jr. that has about 70 thousandths on the low E. It's a lot higher. 10 thousandths doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a fair amount. You can feel it. That's because the style of the guitar, and to be honest with you, personal preference. It's how I like this guitar. I think it really, really works well. So you have to understand your playing style, your string gauge, all those things, and play around with it. If you can get away with low action on your guitar, set it very, very low, see if you like it. If you don't, if you find it uncomfortable, if you find it there's a lot of folks that'll say, I don't have enough room to do bends, to do various things if the action is too low. They actually like to have the kind of the room around the string, if that makes sense, kind of underneath and around, to play. And so some people really like that. Also, the nut width can determine how much room you have on a particular fretboard. You know, this one's pretty narrow, where I think my Texas Toast, the pink guitar I just showed you, is a little bit wider. So all those things can kind of determine how low you actually want your action. This leads me to kind of a related but not exactly the same point, is you'll hear a lot of times people will make blanket statements about kind of guitars in general, especially when it comes to setup. I like to use I use 10s on everything. I use 9s on everything when speaking of the string gauge, for example. They may say, I like really low action. I like such and such action. I like my nut height to be here, blah, blah, blah. Now, for some people, that may apply across every guitar they own. I'm not saying that's wrong. Sometimes that's the case. But sometimes, more often than not, you will find that, like we just discussed a minute ago, between styles of guitars. So the Stratocaster, if it's got a floating tremolo or not, you could have two Strats that are the same guitar basically, but they're set up differently because like that one, the tremolo is decked all the way to the body, and it doesn't have any reason for the strings to have room to go down to warble it. I've got another Stratocaster where I've got the tremolo floated. So I like that, do that like Jeff Beck thing, where you kind of need the room. So they're two guitars that are exactly the same, set up totally differently, right? Sometimes, and I've got 3 juniors, and they're all set up a little bit different based on how I like to play them. I have another guitar that's got a 14-inch radius with carbon fiber in the neck. It's my Machine Gun Kelly signature. And that guitar is set very, very low, very, very flat, lighter strings, for a reason, right? Because that's kind of what I use that guitar for. It's got a higher gain pickup. I use it for various different stuff like that. So when we're talking about playing style, you might not play every guitar exactly the same way even, or you might not use your guitar the same way. This is the point where I'd like to get you in the comments and say, ask this question: do you set up every guitar you own exactly the same? Or do you have little variances between them? And talk about what those are and why. So if you say, well, I play slide on this one guitar and I don't play slide on this other one, that's pretty obvious, right? Or, you know, floated tremolo or not, or maybe you have guitars with a 7 1/4 radius or a 12-inch radius or whatever. Let me know if you have different guitars that are set up different ways, because everybody approaches this different. It's very personal, right? So if you're new to guitar, you might not have played around with this. So if you can, everybody can get in the comments and talk about this a little bit, that'd be awesome, so that those folks that have never really played around with this can kind of get some ideas. Because I don't know that there's any real wrong answer here. I think setting the guitar up to you is super important, right? Which brings us to our 5th thing. Our 5th thing is something that a lot of folks have a hard time with. Setup on a guitar when you buy it new is not quality control. When somebody gets a guitar and the action is a little high, or the intonation is off, or etc., a lot of times they'll be quick to say that the guitar was not properly quality controlled. That is not true. Here's why. There's a few measurements on the guitar that have to come from the factory a certain way. And every guitar manufacturer has a specification for their guitar setup, okay? Let's take, for example, Fender. I wrote some of these down because I don't use them because I think they're too high. I don't remember them, but personally, I think they're too high. So, neck relief. We talked about neck relief, which is this right here, and our truss rod adjustment. I like my truss rod adjustment less than 5 thousandths, almost totally flat. Fender wants theirs to be around 12 thousandths, which I think is too much, okay? They want their string height at the 12th fret to be 80 thousandths, which is 2 millimeters. I think that's way too high. I think you can go way lower, even on a 7 1/4 inch radius. The nut height, they say, should be about 20 thousandths. I think that's too high. So when you get a guitar out of the box, chances are, and there's a reason for this, we're going to get into it. Chances are the action could be too high. We just watched a video, you probably saw it, if you're into guitar stuff, about Paul Reed Smith and how they kind of are the opposite. They set everything really, really low, which makes sense, and that's what they do. That's how they chose to do it. But most manufacturers don't. Most manufacturers want to leave you a little room, okay? What is that a little bit of room for? For your playing style. We just talked about this. Everybody does things a little bit differently. So here's what happens. What if they cut the nut height slots all down to 12 thousandths, but then you were going to use a really heavy string and maybe a low action on this end, and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of fret buzzes? What if you were going to play with a really flat radius and have a really low nut height? Then all of a sudden you don't have enough nut material there. What if that's a big one, is a lot of times the nuts end up coming higher than we want them. That's because you can't put material back into a nut. So if the manufacturer makes it super low and you didn't want it super low, you have no choice but to go pay somebody $100, $150 to replace the nut. They're giving you room to move within your own setup. I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but that's really what it is. The other thing is they've got to leave room for the guitar to move around. So this guitar, of course, this guitar is made in Nashville, but let's say you buy an Asian instrument and it comes across the world in a container, and it gets here and it comes out of the box. They might do a quick quality check on it, but it needs room to move because they don't know where you live. They don't know the humidity of where you live. They don't know the temperature. They don't know any of that stuff. So they've got to give it some room. Otherwise, you're going to get the guitar and you're going to pull it out of the box and there's going to be a bunch of buzzing, and that's worse. Having a little bit of high action sucks because you want it to feel awesome straight out of the box, but the point is, every guitar that you buy, whether it's new or used, whether it's $200 or $20,000, is going to need a setup to your specs. So go back to points number, whatever they are, 3 and 4, and think about what you want out of your guitar setup, and then set all your guitars up in their various ways, depending on the styles and whatever, and then they are yours. Do not expect a guitar to come out of the box perfect. Now, should it come out of the box to the factory spec of the manufacturer? Within reason, yeah. We say within reason for a reason, because again, they can't control climate. They can't control humidity. So let's say you buy a guitar from Sweetwater and they go through their checks, and one of their checks is they just make sure that the guitar is to factory spec. So they'll check a Telecaster and it'll be 2 millimeters, those measurements I just gave you, which I think is too high. Then you get the guitar in the mail after they've done their inspection and the action is even higher. Why could that be? Maybe because the humidity where you live is higher than central Indiana where Sweetwater is. So it can compound over time. So when you get a guitar, it could be wildly out of spec. That's okay. Just do your setup, go through the 5 steps, check your neck relief, check your nut height, check your string height, check your intonation, and then check your pickup height. Just do that in that order and you'll be totally fine. But it is definitely a myth that the guitar should come completely set up for you. Unless you paid for that as a service, then that's different. But completely out of the box, most manufacturers, it's just gonna be kind of middle of the road, if that makes sense. Well, anyway, I needed to change strings on my Gibson Les Paul Special Junior. This is a Junior, right? Yeah, a Les Paul Junior TV model. That's what it's called. People argue with me about the comments. Well, it's a double cut, so that's a special. No, it's actually a double cut Junior TV model. It says it right there. Yeah, so I had the Music City bridge on it for a previous video, and I wanted to put the stock bridge back on it. So that's what we were doing today. I'm putting a new set of strings on it, got the fretboard all oiled up, and this dude's ready to go. Anyway, if you have any other questions about guitar setup, if you want to dive into any of those specifics, or do a particular setup on a particular kind of guitar, let me know, get in the comments, and we will handle that maybe in another video. Like and subscribe, go to DylanTalksTone, do all the things. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you in the next one.